In a quiet suburban neighborhood, where tree-lined streets and white picket fences painted a picture of serenity, lived Marcus and Jasmine. To the outside world, they were the perfect couple, always smiling at community events, hosting lively dinner parties, and sharing laughter with their neighbors. Their home was often filled with the aroma of freshly baked goods from Jasmine's small bakery business, a passion she had nurtured since childhood. But behind closed doors, things weren't as rosy as they seemed. Marcus, a man who prided himself on being practical and level-headed, had a tendency to micromanage every aspect of their lives, especially when it came to finances. He believed he knew best, often dismissing Jasmine's ideas or contributions. On the other hand, Jasmine was ambitious and hardworking. Her dream of owning a successful bakery wasn't just about making money. It was her way of proving to herself, and to Marcus, that she could stand on her own 2 feet. Despite their differences, they had managed to keep their marriage intact for 5 years, though cracks were beginning to show. Their disagreements usually revolved around money. Marcus thought Jasmine spent too much on unnecessary things for her bakery, like fancy decorations or high-quality ingredients. He didn't understand why she couldn't cut corners to save costs. Jasmine, however, argued that quality mattered if she wanted her business to thrive. She worked long hours, juggling orders, managing staff, and experimenting with new recipes, all while trying to contribute to their household expenses. Still, no matter how hard she worked, Marcus rarely acknowledged her efforts. Instead, he criticized her for not focusing enough on their shared responsibilities. One particular issue had been brewing between them for weeks: an unpaid utility bill. It wasn't a large amount, but it became the latest battleground in their ongoing war over finances. Jasmine had assumed Marcus would take care of it, as he usually handled bills. Meanwhile, Marcus thought Jasmine should have paid it, given that her bakery income covered most of their monthly expenses. Neither of them communicated clearly, leading to frustration on both sides. What started as a minor oversight soon escalated into something much bigger. On this particular day, Jasmine decided to celebrate her bakery's 1-year anniversary. It was a milestone she was incredibly proud of, and she wanted to share the joy with those closest to her. She spent hours crafting a beautiful cake, a rich chocolate masterpiece adorned with edible gold accents and intricate designs. Each detail represented her journey: the late nights, the early mornings, the sacrifices, and the triumphs. She invited friends, family, and even a few loyal customers to join her for an evening of food, laughter, and gratitude. As guests arrived, the house buzzed with excitement. Jasmine greeted everyone warmly, her smile lighting up the room. The centerpiece of the celebration was, of course, the stunning cake sitting proudly on the dining table. Children peeked curiously at it, while adults marveled at its artistry. For a brief moment, Jasmine felt a sense of accomplishment wash over her. All her hard work had paid off, and she finally had something to be proud of. But unbeknownst to Jasmine, Marcus had spent the entire day stewing over the unpaid utility bill. When he discovered it earlier that afternoon, his frustration reached a boiling point. He felt disrespected and unappreciated, convinced that Jasmine's priorities were misplaced. As the party unfolded downstairs, Marcus paced upstairs, replaying their arguments in his mind. Little did anyone know, the evening was about to take a dramatic turn, one that would leave lasting impressions on everyone present. The party was in full swing, with laughter and chatter filling the cozy living room. Jasmine moved gracefully among her guests, her warm smile lighting up the space. The aroma of freshly baked treats wafted through the air, mingling with the soft hum of music playing in the background. Friends complimented her on the beautiful cake, calling it a work of art. Even Marcus, despite his simmering frustration, couldn't help but notice how much effort she had put into making the evening special. But beneath his calm exterior, anger brewed like a storm waiting to break. As the night went on, Marcus found himself growing increasingly agitated. He couldn't shake the thought of the unpaid utility bill or the mounting debts they had been struggling to manage. In his mind, Jasmine's elaborate celebration felt like a slap in the face, a display of extravagance when they were barely keeping their heads above water. Every laugh, every compliment directed at her felt like salt rubbed into an open wound. His grip tightened around the glass of water he held, his knuckles turning white as he tried to suppress his emotions. Finally, unable to contain himself any longer, Marcus approached Jasmine in the middle of the room. At first, his tone was measured, almost casual, as he asked her about the bill. "Did you ever think to check if everything was paid before throwing this little party?" he said, his voice carrying just enough edge to make some of the nearby guests pause. Jasmine, caught off guard, blinked in confusion. She hadn't realized the bill was still outstanding. Before she could respond, Marcus continued, his volume rising with each word. "You're always so focused on your bakery and these events," he spat, gesturing toward the table laden with desserts. "But what about us? What about our future? Do you even care?" His words cut through the cheerful atmosphere like a knife, silencing the room. Guests exchanged uneasy glances, unsure whether to intervene or pretend they hadn't heard. Jasmine's cheeks flushed red, partly from embarrassment, and partly from the sting of his accusations. "I do care," she replied softly, trying to keep her composure. "I've been working nonstop to support us both. This bakery is how I contribute, how I try to build something for us." Her voice trembled slightly, but there was a quiet strength behind her words. She hoped Marcus would see reason, that he might understand how much this meant to her. But Marcus wasn't listening. His patience had snapped, and years of pent-up resentment came pouring out. "Contribute? You call wasting money on cakes and decorations contributing? We can't even pay our bills, Jasmine. Maybe if you spent less time showing off and more time dealing with real problems, we wouldn't be in this mess." His voice echoed through the room, drawing stares from everyone present. Jasmine opened her mouth to defend herself, but before she could speak, Marcus acted on impulse. Consumed by rage and frustration, he stormed over to the dining table, grabbed the celebratory cake, the symbol of all her hard work, and hurled it across the room. Time seemed to slow as the cake sailed through the air, landing with a sickening splat against the wall. Icing dripped down the wallpaper, leaving a sticky trail, while shards of the decorative plate scattered across the floor. For a moment, no one moved. The room was deathly silent, save for the faint sound of dripping frosting. Jasmine stood frozen, staring at the ruined cake and then at Marcus, her expression a mix of disbelief and heartbreak. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. Not yet. The guests looked on in shock, unsure of what to say or do. Some fidgeted awkwardly, while others quietly slipped away, sensing that the evening had taken a turn they weren't prepared to witness. Marcus, realizing the weight of what he'd done, clenched his fists and took a step back. For a fleeting second, guilt flickered across his face, but it was quickly replaced by stubborn defiance. He crossed his arms, refusing to apologize or acknowledge the devastation he had caused. Instead, he muttered under his breath, "Maybe now you'll understand." What happened next would change everything, for Jasmine, for Marcus, and for everyone who had witnessed the scene unfold. The room was frozen in time, as if the universe itself had paused to process what had just happened. Jasmine stood motionless, her eyes fixed on the ruined cake that now lay splattered against the wall. The masterpiece she had spent hours crafting, a symbol of her hard work, her dreams, and her resilience, was destroyed in an instant. Icing dripped down the wallpaper like tears, and shards of the decorative plate lay scattered across the floor. Her heart pounded in her chest, each beat echoing the weight of the moment. She felt a mix of emotions: shock, humiliation, anger, but above all, a deep sense of betrayal. Marcus's words still hung in the air, sharp and cutting. "Maybe now you'll understand," he had muttered under his breath, his arms crossed defiantly. But what was there to understand? That her husband, the man she had vowed to stand by through thick and thin, valued control over compassion. that his pride mattered more than her dignity, that their marriage had become a battleground where love was overshadowed by resentment. As these thoughts swirled in her mind, Jasmine realized something else. This wasn't just about the cake. It wasn't even about the unpaid bill. This was about years of frustration, unspoken grievances, and a growing distance between them that neither had been willing to address. The silence in the room was deafening. Guests who had stayed looked away uncomfortably, some pretending to check their phones while others exchanged nervous glances. A few quietly slipped out the door, unwilling to witness any more of the unfolding drama. Those who remained seemed torn between stepping in to defuse the situation and respecting the couple's privacy. No one dared speak, unsure of how to navigate the tension that filled the air like a storm cloud ready to burst. Finally, Jasmine blinked, breaking the spell of paralysis that had gripped her. Slowly, deliberately, she turned her gaze toward Marcus. There was no fire in her eyes, no trace of retaliation or fury. Instead, she looked at him with a calmness that was almost unnerving, a quiet resolve that spoke louder than any angry retort ever could. For the first time, Marcus faltered. His arms dropped slightly, and his jaw clenched as though he were bracing himself for whatever came next. But Jasmine didn't yell. She didn't cry. She didn't say a word. Without uttering a single syllable, she turned on her heel and walked out of the room, leaving behind a trail of stunned faces and a shattered cake. Each step she took resonated with purpose, her heels clicking softly against the hardwood floor. Upstairs, she entered their bedroom and closed the door behind her, shutting out the chaos below. Her hands trembled as she leaned against the doorframe, finally allowing herself to feel the full weight of what had just transpired. Tears streamed down her face, but they weren't tears of weakness. They were tears of clarity. In that moment, she realized she couldn't keep living like this. Downstairs, Marcus stood rooted to the spot, staring at the empty space where Jasmine had been moments earlier. His initial defiance began to crumble, replaced by a gnawing sense of guilt. He glanced around the room, taking in the shocked expressions of the remaining guests. Some looked disappointed, others appeared judgmental. One elderly neighbor shook her head slowly before turning to leave, muttering something about young people these days. Marcus felt exposed, as though everyone could see right through him, the cracks in his temper, the flaws in his character, the pain he had caused. For a brief moment, he considered going after Jasmine, explaining himself, maybe even apologizing. But the stubborn part of him, the same part that had driven him to throw the cake in the first place, held him back. He convinced himself that she would come around eventually, that things would go back to normal once tempers cooled. Yet deep down, he knew better. Something had shifted tonight, something irreversible. The woman who had walked upstairs was not the same woman he had married 5 years ago, and perhaps, he thought grimly, he wasn't the same man either. As the last few guests filtered out, whispering amongst themselves, Marcus was left alone in the wreckage of the evening. The sticky mess on the wall stared back at him, a stark reminder of his actions. Outside, the night was cool and still, offering little comfort to the turmoil brewing inside him. Meanwhile, upstairs, Jasmine sat quietly on the edge of their bed, her mind racing with decisions that would change the course of her life forever. Upstairs, Jasmine sat on the edge of the bed, her hands trembling as she clutched a tissue. The tears that had flowed freely just moments ago began to subside, leaving behind a strange sense of calm. It wasn't the kind of calm that came from relief or happiness. It was heavier, more resolute. Her mind replayed the events of the evening over and over again. Marcus's accusations, his outburst, the sound of the cake hitting the wall, and the stunned silence that followed. Each memory felt like a weight pressing down on her chest, but instead of crushing her, it ignited something within her, a quiet determination to take control of her life. She looked around the room, taking in the familiar sights, the framed photos on the dresser, the cozy quilt draped over the foot of the bed, the small stack of books she had been meaning to read. These things had once brought her comfort, but now they felt foreign, almost like remnants of a life she no longer recognized. How had it come to this? When had their marriage turned into a battleground where love was overshadowed by resentment? She realized the answer didn't matter anymore. What mattered was what came next. Jasmine wiped her face one last time and stood up. Moving to the closet, she pulled out a small suitcase and began packing essentials, clothes, toiletries, a few sentimental items she couldn't bear to leave behind. Her movements were deliberate, each fold of fabric and placement of an item marking a step toward freedom. As she packed, her thoughts drifted to the years she had spent trying to make their relationship work. She had bent over backward to please Marcus, sacrificing pieces of herself along the way. But tonight, something inside her had snapped, not out of anger, but out of clarity. She deserved better. And for the first time in a long time, she believed it. Before closing the suitcase, Jasmine grabbed a pen and a piece of paper from the nightstand. Sitting down on the bed, she paused for a moment, collecting her thoughts. Then, with steady handwriting, she began to write. Marcus, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. Tonight showed me something I tried to ignore for far too long, that our marriage has become toxic. I can't keep living in a cycle of blame and disrespect. I deserve to be valued, not treated as someone whose efforts are never enough. Leaving isn't easy, but staying would mean losing myself completely. Please don't try to find me right away. I need time to think and heal. Maybe someday we can talk about everything that's happened, but for now, I have to focus on rebuilding my life. Take care of yourself. Asterisk. She signed her name at the bottom and placed the note on the pillow, ensuring it would be the first thing Marcus saw when he came upstairs. Folding the letter neatly, she took a deep breath and zipped up the suitcase. For a moment, she hesitated, glancing around the room one final time. Memories flooded back. The laughter, the arguments, the dreams they had once shared. But she pushed them aside. This chapter of her life was ending, and though it hurt, she knew it was necessary. Downstairs, Marcus remained in the living room, staring blankly at the mess on the wall. The party was officially over. The house was eerily quiet, save for the faint ticking of the clock on the mantel. He had cleaned up most of the debris, the broken plate, the sticky icing, but the stain on the wallpaper lingered, a glaring reminder of his actions. Every time he looked at it, guilt gnawed at him. He replayed the scene in his mind, cringing at how quickly he had lost control. Why hadn't he stopped himself? Why had he let his anger get the better of him? His thoughts shifted to Jasmine. Where was she? Was she still upstairs? Or had she left already? The uncertainty gnawed at him almost as much as the guilt. Part of him wanted to march upstairs and demand answers, but another part, the rational part, knew he had no right. He had crossed a line tonight, and there would be consequences. Still, he couldn't shake the fear that she might not forgive him this time. As the minutes ticked by, Marcus grew restless. Finally, unable to bear the silence any longer, he decided to check on her. Taking slow, hesitant steps, he climbed the stairs, each creak of the floorboards amplifying the tension in his chest. When he reached the bedroom door, he pushed it open gently, expecting to see her sitting on the bed, crying or angry. Instead, he found the room empty, save for the suitcase missing from the closet and the note resting on the pillow. Picking up the letter, Marcus sank onto the bed, his heart sinking with every word he read. By the time he finished, his hands were trembling and a lump formed in his throat. He had always prided himself on being strong, in control, but now he felt powerless. The woman who had stood by him through so much was walking away, and he had only himself to blame. Outside, the night stretched endlessly, mirroring the emptiness he now. Jasmine descended the stairs with her suitcase in hand, each step echoing softly in the quiet house. Her heart was heavy, but her resolve was firm. She knew this moment would define the rest of her life, and though fear lingered at the edges of her mind, she refused to let it dictate her actions. As she reached the bottom of the stairs, she spotted Marcus sitting on the couch, his head bowed and shoulders slumped. The note she had left upstairs rested crumpled in his hands, its weight clearly visible in his defeated posture. For a brief second, their eyes met. Marcus opened his mouth as if to say something, perhaps an apology, perhaps a plea. But no words came out. Instead, he simply stared at her, his expression a mixture of guilt and desperation. Jasmine felt a pang of sadness, not for herself, but for what they had lost. This wasn't the man she had fallen in love with. Years of unresolved issues had transformed him into someone she barely recognized. But that chapter was closing now, and there was no turning back. Without saying a word, Jasmine walked past him toward the front door. Her presence seemed to stir something in Marcus, who suddenly sprang to his feet. "Jasmine, wait," he said, his voice trembling. He took a step closer, reaching out as if to stop her, but hesitated when he saw the determination in her eyes. "We can fix this," he continued, his tone pleading. "I'll do better. I promise." Jasmine paused, her hand resting on the doorknob. For a moment, she considered his words. Could they fix this? Could they go back to the way things were before the arguments, the accusations, the disrespect? The thought lingered briefly, but then reality set in. Promises weren't enough. Not anymore. Too much damage had been done, and trust couldn't be rebuilt overnight. With a deep breath, she turned to face him, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. "Marcus," she began, her tone gentle but firm, "I want to believe you. I really do. But promises don't change the fact that I spend years feeling like I'm not good enough for you, like everything I do is wrong or never enough. Tonight showed me that I deserve more than this, more than living in fear of your anger, more than being treated like my dreams don't matter." Her words hung in the air between them, raw and honest. Marcus flinched as if struck, his face reddening with shame. "I didn't mean to hurt you," he whispered, his voice breaking. I got so frustrated. I didn't know how else to make you understand." "I understand perfectly," Jasmine replied, her voice softening slightly. "But understanding doesn't fix things. You threw a cake at me, Marcus, in front of our friends. That's not frustration. That's disrespect. And until you're ready to take responsibility for your actions and truly change, we can't move forward. Not together." Her words hit him like a punch to the gut. He wanted to argue, to explain himself, but he knew deep down that she was right. There was no excuse for what he had done. Still, the thought of losing her terrified him. "Where will you go?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "That's not your concern," she said simply. "What matters is that I need time away from all of this, to figure out who I am without the constant pressure of pleasing you or proving myself. Maybe someday we can talk about everything that's happened, but for now, I have to focus on me." With that, she opened the door and stepped outside. The cool night air greeted her, carrying with it a sense of freedom she hadn't felt in years. Behind her, Marcus stood frozen in the doorway, watching as she loaded her suitcase into the car. He wanted to call out to her, to beg her to stay, but the words caught in his throat. Instead, he watched silently as she climbed into the driver's seat, started the engine, and drove away, leaving behind a life they had built together. As Jasmine pulled onto the empty street, tears streamed down her face once again. But this time, they were different. They weren't tears of pain or humiliation. They were tears of liberation. For the first time in years, she felt in control of her destiny. Ahead of her lay uncertainty, but also possibility. She had friends who loved her, a bakery that brought her joy, and a strength within herself she was only beginning to discover. Whatever came next, she knew one thing for certain. She wouldn't settle for anything less than the respect and happiness she deserved. Back at the house, Marcus sank onto the porch steps, his head in his hands. The silence around him was deafening, a stark contrast to the chaos of earlier that evening. He replayed Jasmine's parting words in his mind, each syllable cutting deeper than the last. For the first time, he realized the full extent of the damage he had caused, not just to their marriage, but to the woman he claimed to love. It was a sobering realization, one that would haunt him long after the echoes of her car faded into the night. The days that followed Jasmine's departure were a whirlwind of emotions, adjustments, and quiet determination. She didn't run far, just to a small apartment she had hastily rented with the help of a close friend. But it felt like an entire world away from the life she had left behind. The space was modest, barely furnished, but it was hers. For the first time in years, she woke up without the weight of Marcus's expectations pressing down on her. There were moments when loneliness crept in, especially late at night when the silence became overwhelming. But she reminded herself why she had made this choice. Freedom wasn't easy, but it was worth it. Meanwhile, word of what had happened spread quickly through their social circle. Neighbors whispered about the cake incident over coffee. Friends debated whether Jasmine had overreacted or done the right thing, and even loyal customers at her bakery asked cautiously if everything was okay. Jasmine heard the murmurs, of course, but instead of letting them shake her confidence, she used them as fuel to prove herself. If people wanted to talk, she decided, they would have something positive to discuss. A week after leaving Marcus, Jasmine returned to her bakery, a place that had always been her sanctuary. Stepping inside felt like coming home. The smell of fresh dough, the hum of ovens warming up, and the cheerful chatter of her staff greeted her as she walked through the door. Her employees noticed a change in her demeanor almost immediately. Gone was the tension that often lingered in her expressions. In its place was a calm resolve and a radiant energy that seemed to light up the room. When one of her assistants hesitantly asked if she was doing all right, Jasmine smiled warmly and said, "I'm exactly where I need to be." Determined to turn this challenging chapter into an opportunity, Jasmine threw herself into her work with renewed passion. She began experimenting with new recipes, hosting themed baking workshops, and even partnering with local businesses to expand her reach. One afternoon, inspired by the events of the past weeks, she created a signature dessert, a rich chocolate cake layered with caramel and sprinkled with edible gold flakes. She named it Sweet Resilience, a tribute to her journey of rebuilding her life. It quickly became a bestseller, drawing curious customers who wanted to taste the story behind the name. But Jasmine wasn't content to keep her transformation private. A few weeks later, she organized a community event at the bakery, inviting friends, family, and loyal patrons to celebrate not just her business, but her personal growth. The evening was filled with laughter, music, and, of course, plenty of delicious treats. As guests mingled, Jasmine stood at the center of the room, holding a microphone in her hand. The crowd quieted as she prepared to speak, their eyes fixed on her expectantly. "Thank you all for being here tonight," she began, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "Many of you know that my life has gone through some unexpected changes recently." She paused, glancing around the room, meeting the gaze of those who had supported her through thick and thin. "What happened wasn't easy, and there were times when I doubted myself. But tonight isn't about looking back. It's about moving forward. This bakery has always been more than just a job for me. It's a symbol of my dreams, my hard work, and my ability to rise above challenges. And now, I'm taking that same spirit and applying it to every part of my life." Her words resonated deeply with everyone present. Friends nodded in agreement, while strangers who had only heard snippets of her story found themselves inspired by her courage. Jasmine went on to explain how she planned to use her platform to support other women facing similar struggles, whether in relationships, careers, or personal growth. By the end of her speech, the room erupted in applause, not out of pity but genuine admiration. As the celebration continued, Jasmine noticed a familiar figure lingering near the entrance. It was Marcus. He hadn't been invited, but he had shown up anyway, standing awkwardly in the corner, unsure if he should approach her. Jasmine spotted him too, and for a moment, their eyes met across the crowded room. His expression was a mixture of regret and hope, but she didn't feel anger or resentment anymore. Instead, she felt a quiet sense of closure. Without interrupting the festivities, she gave him a small nod. a silent acknowledgement that while forgiveness might take time, she no longer carried the burden of their shared pain. That night marked a turning point, not just for Jasmine, but for everyone who witnessed her strength and resilience. Her bold decision to leave had shocked many, but her ability to rise above adversity inspired them all. And as she cut the ribbon for her newly expanded bakery, surrounded by loved ones and supporters, Jasmine knew she had. In the weeks that followed the community event, Jasmine threw herself into her work with a renewed sense of purpose. Her bakery, once just a small dream, was now thriving more than ever. The sweet resilience cake became a symbol not only of her personal journey but also of hope for others who visited her shop. Customers often lingered longer than necessary, sharing their own stories of struggle and triumph over steaming cups of coffee and slices of cake. Jasmine listened intently to each one, offering words of encouragement when needed. Slowly, her bakery transformed into something greater, a safe space where people felt seen and supported. Her decision to expand the business proved to be a turning point. With the profits from increased sales, she renovated the space, adding cozy seating areas, shelves stocked with homemade jams and pastries, and even a small corner dedicated to hosting workshops. She called it the Resilience Corner, where local artists, writers, and entrepreneurs could gather to share ideas and inspire one another. Word spread quickly about this vibrant hub of creativity, and soon, Jasmine's bakery wasn't just known for its desserts, it was celebrated as a cornerstone of the community. Meanwhile, Marcus struggled to come to terms with the life he had lost. After seeing Jasmine at the bakery event, he realized how much he had underestimated her strength and determination. The image of her standing confidently in front of a cheering crowd stayed with him, gnawing at his conscience. For days afterward, he replayed their interactions in his mind. The arguments, the accusations, the moment he threw the cake, and each memory filled him with regret. He knew he couldn't undo what had happened, but he wanted to make amends, not just for Jasmine's sake, but for his own. He started by reaching out to friends and family, seeking advice on how to move forward. At first, they were hesitant to engage. Many felt protective of Jasmine and skeptical of his intentions. But Marcus persisted, admitting his mistakes openly and asking for guidance. One friend suggested therapy, explaining that real change required self-awareness and effort. Reluctantly, Marcus agreed to attend counseling sessions, hoping to better understand his behavior and learn healthier ways to communicate. As weeks turned into months, Marcus began making subtle changes in his life. He took responsibility for household bills, organized his finances meticulously, and even volunteered at a local shelter, finding solace in helping others. Though these actions wouldn't erase the past, they gave him a sense of control over his present. Occasionally, he sent messages to Jasmine through mutual friends, expressing remorse and wishing her well. Each time, she responded politely but firmly, reiterating that she needed space to heal and rebuild. Jasmine, for her part, leaned heavily on her support system. Friends, family, and loyal customers rallied around her, offering encouragement during moments of doubt. Her best friend, Lisa, became her confidant, accompanying her to networking events and brainstorming new ideas for the bakery. Together, they launched a social media campaign highlighting stories of resilience, featuring interviews with women who had overcome adversity in various forms. The response was overwhelming, bringing even more attention to Jasmine's growing brand. Despite her success, there were still quiet nights when Jasmine allowed herself to reflect on her marriage. She didn't hate Marcus. In fact, she pitied him, recognizing that his actions stemmed from deep-seated insecurities and poor coping mechanisms. But pity wasn't enough to rebuild trust. Instead, she focused on nurturing her independence, rediscovering hobbies she had abandoned years ago, and setting ambitious goals for her future. By the time autumn arrived, her bakery had become a beloved fixture in the neighborhood, and Jasmine had earned a reputation as a woman who turned pain into power. One crisp morning, as she arranged fresh batches of sweet resilience cakes in the display case, Jasmine received an unexpected visit. It was Marcus, standing nervously outside the door, holding a potted plant wrapped in brown paper. His appearance startled her, but she invited him in nonetheless, curious about his intentions. They sat down at a corner table, the air between them thick with unspoken words. "I'm not here to ask you to come back," Marcus said finally, his voice trembling. "I know I messed up too badly for that. But I wanted to say, I'm sorry. Truly sorry. You didn't deserve any of what I did, and I'll spend the rest of my life regretting it." Tears welled up in his eyes, but he continued, "You've inspired me to be better, not just for you, but for myself. I hope someday you can forgive me, even if we're no longer together." Jasmine studied him quietly, noting the sincerity in his tone. While forgiveness wouldn't come easily, she appreciated his effort to acknowledge his faults. "Thank you for saying that," she replied softly. "It takes courage to admit when you're wrong. I wish you nothing but growth and happiness, Marcus. Maybe someday we can find peace, but for now, I need to focus on building the life I want." With that, they parted ways, not as enemies, but as two people working toward redemption in their separate journeys. As Marcus walked away, Jasmine returned to her work, smiling faintly. She had built her bakery from nothing, and now she was building a life defined by strength, resilience, and endless possibilities. Whatever came next, she knew she'd face it head-on. Months passed, and Jasmine's life continued to flourish in ways she had never imagined. Her bakery, now a thriving hub of creativity and community spirit, became the talk of the town. The sweet resilience cake remained a bestseller, its layers symbolizing not just her personal journey, but also the collective strength of everyone who walked through her doors. People came not only for the delicious treats, but also for the warmth and inspiration they found within those walls. Jasmine hosted monthly events, poetry readings, art exhibits, and even financial literacy workshops for aspiring entrepreneurs, all aimed at empowering others to chase their dreams. The grand reopening of her expanded bakery marked a milestone, drawing crowds that spilled onto the sidewalk. Local news outlets covered the event, praising Jasmine as a beacon of resilience and innovation. As she stood on the small stage set up outside, cutting the ribbon with a wide smile, she felt an overwhelming sense of pride. Friends, family, loyal customers, and even strangers cheered as confetti rained down around her. Among the crowd stood Lisa, tears streaming down her face as she clapped louder than anyone else. For Jasmine, this moment wasn't just about success. It was proof that she could rise above adversity and create something beautiful out of heartbreak. Marcus, too, had undergone significant changes. Therapy had opened his eyes to patterns of behavior he hadn't recognized before: his need for control, his inability to communicate effectively, and the deep-seated fears that fueled his anger. He worked diligently to address these issues, attending weekly sessions and practicing mindfulness techniques to manage his emotions. At the shelter where he volunteered, he found solace in helping others rebuild their lives after hardship. Slowly but surely, he began to see glimpses of the man he wanted to become: patient, empathetic, and self-aware. Though they no longer spoke directly, Marcus kept tabs on Jasmine's progress from afar. Social media updates and occasional stories shared by mutual friends painted a picture of a woman who had truly blossomed. Seeing her thrive filled him with both admiration and regret. He knew he couldn't undo the damage he had caused, but he hoped his efforts to change might someday earn her forgiveness, not for reconciliation, but for closure. On quiet evenings, he often reflected on how much he had learned from losing her, vowing never to repeat the same mistakes in future relationships. As winter approached, Jasmine decided to take her mission further. Inspired by the support she had received, she launched a mentorship program for women entrepreneurs, offering guidance, resources, and encouragement to those starting their own businesses. The initiative quickly gained traction, attracting participants from all walks of life. One mentee, a single mother struggling to balance work and childcare, credited Jasmine with giving her the confidence to pursue her passion for handmade jewelry. Another, a recent college graduate unsure of her career path, discovered her love for baking under Jasmine's tutelage. Watching these women grow reminded Jasmine of her own journey, a testament to the power of perseverance. By spring, Jasmine's influence extended beyond her immediate circle. She was invited to speak at conferences and panel discussions, sharing her story of overcoming challenges and building a successful business. Each speech was met with standing ovations. Audiences moved not just by her accomplishments, but by her authenticity and vulnerability. "Life throws us curveballs," she would say, "but it's how we respond that defines us. Pain can either break you or shape you into someone stronger. I chose the latter." Back in his own life, Marcus continued to rebuild piece by piece. Though loneliness lingered, he embraced it as a reminder of the lessons he had learned. He reconnected with old friends, mended strained relationships, and even started dating again, this time with a focus on healthy communication and mutual respect. While he occasionally wondered what might have been if he had handled things differently, he accepted that some chapters were meant to close. What mattered most was ensuring he didn't repeat the same errors moving forward. One sunny afternoon, nearly a year after the infamous cake incident, Jasmine sat on the patio of her bakery, sipping tea and watching children laugh as they played nearby. A delivery truck pulled up outside, carrying supplies for an upcoming event. As workers unloaded boxes, she noticed a familiar figure approaching. The driver. It was Marcus, holding a clipboard and smiling nervously. They locked eyes briefly, and he gave a polite nod before turning back to his task. There was no animosity, no lingering resentment, just quiet acknowledgement of how far they had both come. Jasmine returned to her tea, feeling a profound sense of peace. The road ahead was uncertain,